welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're really zeroing in on something critical for anyone managing safety at height.
That's right. We're talking rope descent system anchorages, RDS anchorages.
Exactly. And we've got a stack of OSHA documents here, a memo from late 2017, a few interpretation letters spanning 2017 to 2020, plus the main standard, 1910.27.
Our mission really is to kind of cut through the regulatory language.
Yeah, give you clear, actionable insights, things you can actually use to ensure compliance and, well, keep people safe when they're working way up there.
Because these systems, RDS, they're vital for so much building work, cleaning, maintenance, inspections, you name it.
But safety absolutely hinges on understanding the rules, especially for those anchorages holding everything up.
And it's interesting, how OSHA's guidance evolved. It reflects the real-world challenges of putting these safety measures into practice.
Okay, so let's start maybe with that initial compliance timeline. The original deadline for getting those RDS anchorages inspected, tested, certified. It was November 20, 2017.
Right. But things didn't exactly roll out smoothly.
Seems like it. What happened?
Well, that November 2017 memo really highlights a classic issue with new regs, particularly specialized ones.
Which is?
A shortage, basically. Not enough qualified people available to actually do the inspections and certifications needed across the country. A bottleneck.
Ah, okay. So OSHA had to react.
They did. They made a pragmatic call, decided to use enforcement discretion. Case-by-case basis.
So not a free pass, but some flexibility if you were genuinely trying.
Exactly. But you had to prove it. It highlights that broader challenge,
Yeah.
You need the expertise on the ground when you roll out new safety rules.
Right. So it wasn't just a delay. Building owners had specific things they needed to do to show they were making that real effort.
Oh, absolutely. Due diligence was key. For building owners, that meant keeping records.
Records of what, specifically?
Proof they'd contacted qualified inspectors, copies of written agreements, basically showing a plan of action, anticipated dates for getting it done. And crucially, they had to show they were doing this before work started, and they had to tell the employers using the building, hey, these anchorages aren't certified yet. That communication link is vital.
Makes sense. And what about the employers? The companies actually sending workers down the ropes. What was their responsibility during this discretionary period?
Their job was to actively ask the building owner, are these anchorages certified? Get that info.
Okay.
And if they were thinking about using uncertified anchors, and this is important, they had to prove that there wasn't a safer way to do the job.
Right. Like no other feasible option.
Exactly. Or that using those other methods, like maybe a scaffold or lift, would actually create more risk. It really brings home that hierarchy of controls principle.
Always look for the safest way first. Eliminate, substitute, engineer before relying on systems like RDS.
Precisely. RDS comes after considering those other options.
Okay, let's get into the core requirements then. Section 1910.27B1. This seems to put a lot of weight on the building owner.
It absolutely does. The standard's very clear. Before anyone uses an RDS on their building, the owner must give the employer written confirmation.
Written confirmation stating what?
That each specific anchorage point has been identified, it's been tested, it's certified, and importantly, it's maintained. Maintained to support at least 5,000 pounds.
Wow, 5,000 pounds. That's substantial.
Per worker attached, mind you. And in any direction that force might be applied, it builds in a critical safety margin.
And that's not just a one-off check, is it?
Definitely not. It's an ongoing thing. That written confirmation has to be backed by two things.
Which are?
One, an annual inspection by a qualified person every year. And two, a certification by a qualified person. That needs to happen as necessary, maybe after alterations or damage, but at least every 10 years.
So a continuous cycle. Inspect annually, recertify at least decennially.
That's the rhythm. Keeps the anchorages verified as safe over their lifespan.
And for the employers using them. Sounds like they need that paperwork before work starts.
Exactly. Get the written assurance before an employee uses the anchorage. And they have to keep that document for the whole job duration.
It really highlights that shared responsibility. Building owner certifies, employer verifies.
Absolutely. And remember, the RDS includes more than just the anchor. You've got the rope, the descent device, connectors like carabiners, the chair or seat board, all parts of the system.
Good point. Now, specific equipment often raises questions. We've got a letter here, November 2020, about davit booms.
Yeah.
What was the situation there?
Yeah, this was a common setup they looked at. You've got a David arm mounted on the roof.
Okay.
And on that single boom, there are two separate independent anchor points. The question was, can you legally attach your main RDS support line to one anchor and your separate fall arrest lifeline to the other anchor on that same boom?
Right. Two lines, one David arm, two distinct anchor points on it. Seems efficient, but is it compliant?
OSHA said yes, it is compliant, but there's a condition, or rather, two conditions.
Okay, what are they?
The anchor used for the fall protection line, the backup, has to meet the fall arrest anchorage requirements in Section 1910.140C13.
Which means?
Either it holds 5,000 pounds, or it's part of a complete system designed with a safety factor of at least 2, supervised by a qualified person.
Got it. And the other anchor?
The anchor used for the main RDS line has to meet the specific RDS requirements we just discussed, Section 1910.27B1, identified, tested, certified, 5,000 pounds.
So as long as each anchor meets the standard for its specific purpose, one for RDS, one for fall arrest, using them on the same David boom is okay.
Correct. That clarification was really helpful for a lot of people using those systems.
No doubt. Another area of potential confusion, RDS versus IRS industrial rope access systems. There's a May 2020 letter about this. What's the main takeaway?
This is a really crucial distinction OSHA drew. They stated clearly, IRS are not considered rope descent systems under the definition in Section 1910.21b.
Okay, they're different categories entirely. Why does that matter so much?
Because it means those specific RDS anchorage rules in Section 1910.27b, the identification, testing, certification, paperwork trail we just talked about, they do not apply to IRA's anchorages.
Whoa, okay, so if those RDS rules don't apply, what does govern IRA safety, particularly anchorages?
Oh, other OSHA fall protection standards definitely still apply. Big time.
Like which ones?
Things like 1910.28, the general duty to have fall protection, Section 1910.29 on system criteria, Section 1910.30 on training, and importantly, Section 1910.140, which covers personal fall protection systems.
And the anchorages for IRAs fall under that Action 1910.140.
Exactly. Specifically, paragraph C12 and C13 in Section 1910.140 cover anchorage requirements for systems used in IRAs. So while the specific certification paperwork under Section 1910.27 isn't required for IRA anchors, they still need to meet rigorous strength and safety factor requirements under Section 1910.140.
So the anchorages still need to be safe and strong,
Yeah.
just governed by a different section of the code.
Precisely. If you're a safety manager, you need to know which system your crews are using, RDS or IRA, because the specific anchorage documentation and potentially the inspection protocols will differ. Both need to be safe, but the regulatory path is different.
That's a really important distinction. Moving beyond the anchor itself, let's look at Section 1910.27b2. This section details other rules for using RDS safely. What about that height limit?
Right, there's generally a 300-foot limit. You shouldn't use RDS for descents higher than 300 feet above the ground or grade level.
Generally. Are there exceptions?
Yes, there's a key exception. If getting to heights above 300 feet using other methods like lifts, scaffolds, etc. isn't feasible, or if using those other methods would actually create a greater hazard.
Then RDS might be permissible above 300 feet.
Correct. But the employer needs to carefully evaluate and justify that decision. It's not an automatic green light.
Makes sense. What other key usage rules are in there?
Quite a few important ones. You've got to use the RDS according to the manufacturer's instructions or under a qualified person's direction.
Okay. Training.
Mandatory. Users must be trained per Section 1910.3 and, crucially, inspect the gear, the entire RDS setup at the start of every single work shift.
Every shift. And if something's wrong,
take it out of service immediately. Damaged or defective gear can't be used, period.
what about setting it up? Rigging.
Proper rigging is essential. Secure anchorages, obviously. And using tiebacks is critical, especially if you're dealing with transportable or non-permanent anchorages to prevent accidental dislodgement.
And the big one, backup systems.
Absolutely fundamental. Every worker using an RDS must also be connected to a separate, independent personal fall arrest system, PFAS.
Meeting the requirements of Subpart I.
Yes. That PFAS acts as the critical backup if anything goes wrong with the main RDS line or anchor. Redundancy saves lives.
No argument there. What about the strength of the RDS components themselves?
Good point. All the components, ropes, descenders, carabiners, harnesses, except for the seat board, have to be rated for a minimum load of 5,000 pounds.
And the seat board.
That needs to support a live load of 300 pounds. And employers need a plan, a rescue plan.
For prompt rescue if someone does fall and is caught by their PFAS.
Exactly. You need to be able to get them down quickly and safely. Suspension trauma is a real risk.
Other protections, like for the ropes.
Yes, protect the ropes from sharp edges or abrasion. Use edge protectors. And if the descent is over 130 feet, you need to stabilize the ropes at the work area to prevent excessive swinging.
Sounds like weather plays a role, too.
It does. You can't use RDS in hazardous weather, high winds, storms, icing conditions. It's just too risky.
And tools.
Secure them, prevent dropped objects. Also, keep ropes away from heat sources, open flames, welding, harsh chemicals, anything that could damage them. It's a whole system of precautions.
It really is comprehensive. Now let's shift to that August 2017 letter. OSHA responding to NATE, the National Association of Tower Erectors. They raised some specific concerns.
They did. Industry-specific points. For instance, they asked for more time, extensions on the deadlines for training workers, and providing the required fall protection gear.
Especially for guys working on commercial building roofs, it seems.
Right. But OSHA said no to the extensions. Their reasoning was that existing rules, like the telecom standard and construction fall protection standards, already covered much of this. The training should overlap significantly.
NATE also pushed back on the 300-foot height limit for RDS, specifically for telecom towers.
Yeah, they wanted a blanket exemption for their industry. Again, OSHA denied the blanket exemption.
But they pointed back to the existing exception.
Exactly. They reiterated that if other access methods aren't feasible or create a greater hazard above 300 feet on a tower, then RDS could still be used under that exception. It allows for those unique, challenging tower situations.
Okay. NATE also questioned the 5,000-pound anchorage requirement for the personal fall arrest system, the backup line. Did they want a lower number?
They seem to be probing if certain specialized engineered systems might justify a different anchor strength.
And OSHA's response?
OSHA clarified, yes, 5,000 pounds is the default. However, there's the performance alternative.
The one we mentioned earlier?
Right. You can use anchors with a different strength rating if they're part of a complete PFAS that's properly designed, installed, and used under a qualified person's supervision, and the whole system maintains that safety factor of at least 2.
So flexibility exists, but it requires qualified oversight in engineering.
That's the gist. It's not just arbitrarily picking a lower number.
What about connector testing and the trigger height for fall protection? NATE had points there too.
They did. They pointed out a mismatch between OSHA's connector testing rules and the ANSI standards everyone uses.
And OSHA acknowledged that.
Yes, they did. They said, you're right, there's an inconsistency, and indicated they'd issue a technical correction to align with ANSI. Good catch by NATE there.
And the trigger height. NATE wanted 6 feet, like construction.
Yes, they argued for consistency with construction's 6-foot rule, but OSHA held firm on the 4-foot trigger height for general industry walking working surfaces.
Why stick with 4 feet?
They cited its long history, alignment with other consensus standards, and basically said lowering the height maintains consistent protection across various general industry tasks.
Okay, one last related area, scaffolds. We're focused on RDS, but Section 1010.27 does mention scaffolds briefly.
It does. Paragraph A basically says that if you're using scaffolds in a general industry setting, they need to meet the requirements of the construction scaffold standard.
So 29 CFR 1926 subpart L.
That's the one. There used to be some confusion about calculating the maximum intended loads specifically, whether the scaffold's own weight counted. OSHA clarified, or indicated intent to clarify, that they'd align with the construction definition, which typically excludes the scaffold's own weight when you're calculating that 4.1 safety factor for the load it needs to support. The main point for safety folks is consistency. Scaffold rules should align whether it's general industry or construction work.
Okay, so wrapping this all up, we've covered a lot of ground on RDS anchorages and related rules. What are the absolute key takeaways for the safety professionals, the risk managers listening right now?
I think there are 3 main things. First, understand the distinct roles but shared responsibility of building owners and employers for RDS anchors. Owners certify, employers verify before use. That communication is critical.
Okay, number 1, owner versus employer responsibility.
Second, know the difference between RDS and IRAs. They are not the same under OSHA. Different systems, different specific anchorage rules apply. Section 1910.27 for RDS, Section 1910.140 for IRAs anchorages. Using the wrong standard leads to noncompliance.
Number 2, RDS is not IRAS. Check the right standard.
And third, remember, it's not just about the anchorage. Safe RDS use involves a whole host of other requirements: the height limits, the mandatory training, the daily inspections, the separate fall arrest system, equipment strength, rescue plans, weather limits, all of it.
Right. It's a complete system approach. You can't just focus on one piece.
Exactly. A solid grasp of all these details is really the foundation for keeping workers safe when using these systems.
Absolutely. It might seem complex navigating all these OSHA letters and standards, but getting it right is just fundamental to safety culture and preventing incidents.
Which brings us to a final thought for you, our listener. Thinking about everything we've discussed, the complexities, the interpretations, the shared duties, what are the most critical steps you should take right now?
Not just for ticking compliance boxes with RDS rules, but for genuinely fostering that strong safety culture in your organization when work involves rope descent or any fall protection.
We really encourage you to go back to those source documents, the standards, the letters we mentioned, dig into the specifics that apply to your operation.
Definitely worth the time. This deep dive into OSHA's rope descent system regulations has been presented by Safety One Source,
Your partner in delivering essential safety knowledge for professionals like you. Thanks for tuning in.
We'll catch you on the next deep dive.